After this, there is no turning back. Do you want to choose the blue pill or the red pill? This is a paraphrased quote from the 1999 movie The Matrix, one of many movies about the bizarre interplay between technology and humanity in which reality itself becomes unstable. In this episode, we are going to take a break from discussing actual technologies and look instead at how they have been portrayed in the movies, often with surprising accuracy. Did these films simply represent our times, or have they been able to predict and influence our future? Let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes. I'm Steve Prentice, and this is the Thales Security Sessions podcast. To help gather together just a handful of the many movies that have dealt with technology, humanity, and reality, I sat down recently with David Holmes, CTO at Thales. Here is our conversation. So, David, welcome back to the Thales Security Sessions podcast.
Thanks, Steve. I'm always so glad to work with you.
It's great fun. It really is. Yeah, and this one, again, doesn't even need any prep, really. It's just a matter of thinking back to the kind of things you really like. So since you are the guest, let's start with one of yours. We're talking here about really how close have we come to a world predicted by the movies of Hollywood and elsewhere. What movie comes to your mind, first of all, in that particular area?
All right. So just to set the frame, I think when we think of like the digital world, I kind of use the year 1995 as like, I think that was the invention of the web browser as sort of like, that's the beginning of the World Wide Web. And so that's a fixed point in my mind. So I want you, listener, to harken back to the year 1982, 13 years before that. A 12-year-old David Holmes rides his bicycle to the theater. And 1982 was an amazing year for like sci-fi stuff. Like think of the movies that came out. Blade Runner came out in 82. E.T., Extraterrestrial, Wrath of Khan. But there was this movie called Tron that I saw in the theater in 82. And in the movie Tron, it sort of depicts like an early internet and somebody, Jeff Bridges, a young and handsome Jeff Bridges, getting sucked into what they called the grid at the time. They didn't even have the word internet or anything. They had the concept, and then it's very sort of stylized, very simple graphics. And what follows in that short, I think it's about 90-minute movie, is effectively a replay of Star Wars, right? A lot of similar plot structures in there. But that was sort of the first time that I had seen the concept of, hey, what if there's a digital world out there where we have avatars, and what if you could become one of those avatars? So I thought that was extremely prescient. I don't know. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you can say that the video and special effects are kind of simple, but for the time they were eye-popping. I mean, it was just incredible to think about being able to step into this virtual world, like moving inside a video game. And that's what the video games looked like back then as well. Lots of vector graphics and straight lines and so forth. So to be inside, almost like underneath the real world that we think is the real world, was very exciting and marvelous perspectives, marvelous direction. So for those who have not seen it, it's just like going to watch a black and white movie from the 30s or 40s. It's like that was a different medium, a different style, but boy, what they could do with it. So yeah, Tron is a marvelous one. And of course, that did lead to the ones that followed, like I think The Matrix is by far one of the most fascinating alter universe or parallel universe type things as well. The whole notion that maybe everything we're seeing here is actually just some sort of construct that we are living through, and once in a while something might just glitch and we sort of get a sense, hey, wait a second, maybe there's a little failure here. So I must say I'd love to leap from Tron to The Matrix.
Sure.
There are two cool things about it that I really love. One is the fact that despite it being a look into the future and this parallel or manufactured world, they still had to use payphones to get around. And so they had to go to the traditional telephone, which is and was that key sort of connection point between everything. I mean, the world before telephones, we were all very, very isolated. Once we got the telephone, even though radio came before it, once you got the telephone, you had now this interaction over distance. So The Matrix to me, I love. And there's a scene in that where I think they see a cat walking by an open doorway. And I think it's Keanu Reeves' character looks again and sees the cat moving again. Like they've just played it twice. It's like a little glitch in the Matrix, which became, of course, a term that people use to this day. It's a
Yeah.
glitch in the Matrix. And I think of it myself every time I jump back onto the internet. I say I'm going back into the Matrix to see what's going on. It's the world we live in, I think.
Are you Neo in the Matrix, Steve? In your mind?
I I don't know which character I'd want to be in that. It's just the overall sense of diving in almost comfortably. Well, for those of us who are enthusiasts for technology anyway, like getting into a back into a nice warm bed, to dive back into the Matrix where your mail is and your messages are and all your interactions are.
Mm.
I know some people don't agree with that kind of stuff, but I find there's comfort in reconnecting. And when the Wi-Fi goes out and I'm suddenly disconnected from the Matrix, I get very nervous.
um, the original Matrix movie is one of my favorite movies of all time, partly because of the writing and the direction and the style.
Hmm.
My oldest son was born in 2002, and when he was probably about 10 or 12 or 13, somewhere in there, I had asked him if he'd ever seen the movie The Matrix. He's like, The Matrix, what's that? So I played it for him, and at the end, he goes, Dad, that was the greatest movie I've ever seen. And I said, I know, right? I know. The thing about The Matrix, the thing that really stays with people is sort of the concept that the world that we think is real is not real, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Which is sort of similar to Tron in that there's another alternate reality. But in the Matrix world, the world that you're living in, what you think is on this side of the screen is actually not real. And that the reality is so much more awful than that. And the, I don't know if you've heard of this sort of theory about the simulation.
I have
So
heard,
there's
yes.
a theory out there that's similar to the Matrix that what if we are all living in sort of a Matrix like apparatus, and that every now and then we see a glitch that
Yeah.
suggests that this is silly. Obviously, no sane world would be built in this way. And I swear, probably at least once a year, I have that thought like, I must be living in a simulation because this should never happen.
It's kind of like deja vu, right? You have that experience where you experience deja vu in your mind and think, I've seen this before, I've just been here. So, yes, it can be very easy to tie that in. And you know what? It also connects very well to is a movie that doesn't sound like science fiction at all, but The Truman Show with Jim
Mm,
Carrey. That was a reflection, let's say, on our obsession with reality TV. It was in the early days of reality TV, really. But once again, you've got an alternate reality in the chief character, of course, just living this life that is completely staged. And I know I've spoken to a lot of people who like to think that as well, that everything around them is kind of like a movie. So as you turn a corner, all the extras and all the background characters and so on spring into life to become this thing. And then as you disappear, so they relax and go away again. So the whole notion of this produced television, all-seeing eye, Ed Harris as the director, watching everything and influencing the narrative, became Big Brother and became all of those reality TV shows. And again, just shows this questioning of where are we in
mhm,
terms of a true reality versus what has been manufactured for us. You see it today, for example, in just people's obsessions with social media. You might know that you're sitting in your room doom scrolling through Instagram, but the kind of information that's being shared to you is starting to shape your mind around from an algorithm driven constant feed of the things you want to see. So it becomes like, okay, your reality is now being dictated by this same sort of all seeing director out there that's pumping more of the same material to you. So that's why I just love that film. It's beautifully shot and just quite unique and original in being that kind of, are we in a fishbowl? Are we being looked at by others in an alternate world? And I don't want to spoil it, but that's of course what the Jim Carrey's lead character pursues as the film goes along.
Was that his first like attempt at a serious movie, Jim Carrey?
I don't know if it was, but it's like most talented comedians. You might like or dislike Jim Carrey's style, but there's no question he was incredibly talented at what he did. And a lot of them discover they have that breadth of abilities. I mean, Robin Williams was the same to start doing serious films as well. And some people were disappointed by that because they expect them to be the clowns all the time. But they have that capacity for true emotion and interpretation of the character. So I'm not sure if it was his first serious one, but it fit him well. I think other actors could have played that. It wasn't like a singular Jim Carrey vehicle like The Mask would have been. But he did an excellent job, and I think the film itself was a mirror on the mirror that looks at us, and that to me was just marvelous.
One aspect of that movie that I don't know gets talked about a lot is today we talk about main character versus NPC, which is a set of terms from role playing games where you might be in Skyrim or something and you're talking to the bartender, right? That is a non player character. And people have sort of taken this shorthand to talk about other people as, oh, they just have NPC energy, right? In almost everyone's life, I would hope that you are the main character of your life, right? But in that movie, not only was he the main character of his life, he was the main character for a real story that was being told.
It was just revealing something about what we may suspect is happening, but we're not really too sure about it. So these, again, they all speak to different parts of a prediction or a reflection on the kind of technology we're facing. And quite obviously, when people talk about movies and sci-fi, one of the most common ones that comes to bear is 2001: Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. That, again, was a film that was very unique, and it influenced so many of today's great filmmakers as a magnificent piece of filmmaking art. A lot of younger viewers today find that it moves incredibly slowly, but this was an era where time for things to develop on screen was allowed. And you were expected to formulate your thoughts and opinions as it unfolded on the screen rather than being a constant barrage of high-speed action. But the most famous character, you might say, from that movie was the HAL 9000 computer, symbolized just simply by the glowing red eye or the glowing red lens. But it's fun how it comes back around today as we talk about LLMs like ChatGPT and the way in which they have been tested as machines that have now passed the Turing test in terms of being, it's impossible to tell whether you're talking to an LLM or to a human being when you're having a conversation. And the tests that they have run, for example, to say, well, I need you to solve these next 5 mathematical problems and then turn yourself off. And you might not be able to turn back on again. And it has been documented that certain brands of LLMs refused to do that.
Open the bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. The ultimate fear of that entire film, well, there's two, really, I suppose, because the other one is about the presence of extraterrestrial, wiser beings observing us. But the ultimate fear about the technology in that film was exactly that the computers then decide to not obey, but to become sentient. And you only need to do a little bit of research on quantum computing and the discussion about whether sentience will be achieved to see that it kind of almost has. The HAL 9000 seems to be coming to play. But I will say that when looking at that film in its entirety, it's a film that you have to watch from beginning to end without a break. I've seen it a couple of times on TV where they put some really badly placed commercials on broadcast television, not streaming, obviously. The most profound scene, I will dare say, one of the most profound scenes in all of movie history, is when the hominid creatures, the sort of the pre-Stone Age, our distant ancestors running around, discover that a bone, a femur bone from a long dead cattle creature of some sort, can be used as a weapon. That just that moment where the hominid character looks at it and suddenly realizes this can become a tool and a weapon. And so the film, of course, jump cuts right from there to a pen floating in space, a marvelous transition from a filmmaking perspective, but from a observation of where we became something other. We learned we could now impact the world around us rather than simply surviving it, was the key message of that silent image of discovering the bone. And I just remember that from the film because all we're doing right now is just that. We work this planet to our own ends, not necessarily in a healthy fashion. So that's why I just recommend this as a remarkable film. Despite the fact that it seems long and drawn out, it's that the pace of that is what sets the tension to get to the point where HAL 9000 overrules the humans in its own way.
Oh, spoiler alert, Steve.
So your turn, Dave.
Let me just follow up on that. That was Stanley Kubrick, right, who directed.
It was Stanley Kubrick.
I try to tend to follow what I consider very strong directors, and he certainly was one. I was just thinking about this the other day about that pacing. The only director right now who's working who I think similarly does these long, long, slow shots, but somehow are still really effective is Vince Gilligan,
Mm,
the Breaking Bad director, X Files, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah.
But he's got that new show out, Pluribus. And I'm not crazy about the show, but if you look at it visually, you will see they almost always open with his signature long, long, long shots with no dialogue of just stuff happening. And if you put
Mhm.
your mind in the right frame, you can just become absorbed in it and wonder where this is going. And so you basically have to take that back to 2001.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, all the great directors have learned from their predecessors and acknowledged them in some way. So we see Kubrick as just a major director of the 70s and beyond. So, yes, these are remarkable films that hold a mirror up to our existence and beyond to predict what may happen as well. And there's some TV series that do the same thing. One of my favorites was Max Headroom. And this, again, goes back to the era of Tron, with a character that takes on a personality and becomes an issue unto itself. But when we look at the way in which television has changed since the 1960s and 70s, situation comedies and movies of the week, to much more fast-paced, interactive and reality-based things, I think that Max Headroom was a fun show. It was an upbeat show, but it also ushered in this world of the intimate relationship that we have with television.
There is one movie this was actually from a book written very, very specifically for Generation X and for the people who were 12 in 1982, called Ready Player One. And for, I think, people who were sort of teens in that era, that book it touched like every button from your memory and was just a blast. But I think people born slightly before then or slightly after, it may not have resonated with them. But if you watch that movie today or read the book, it is a similar concept of, hey, the real world is this drab, terrible place where lives are short, nasty, and brutish. But in this digital world, everything is completely amazing and wonderful. And I feel like sometime maybe in the next 10 years, there is going to be this possible pivot point between, does the digital world become better than the world that we live in now? Or will we realize that it should really have just been like movies? Like we just dip into there and we use it for inspiration, but that it's not the place that we are the main character. I don't know how to predict which way it's going to go.
It does make sense, and it also ushers in that idea of nostalgia in a way that one movie that we had discussed in preparing for this episode was Back to the Future, the first one especially, because this allows you the whole concept of time travel in a very appealing way to not only look back on how things kind of were and how the potential to influence the future if you can travel back in time to make things happen, but also, of course, making fun of some of the things that did develop in the later years after that return from the 50s into the 80s and so on. So I know that you had mentioned this film. What is it about Back to the Future that you like?
Just the sort of raucous energy of it. And you had mentioned the 50s and the 80s. And even during the 80s, a lot of people drew the parallels. People were so sick of the counterculture 60s and 70s, and the 80s were seen as like a return to, I don't know, like American values or home and hearth and simpler times. And if you even look at the music from the 80s, it's much simpler. It's not these sort of rock anthems that were glorious in their time. Don't get me wrong. But I feel like that movie it wasn't just transporting people in the movie, it was also reminding them that the culture can sometimes recycle and come back around as well.
That's very true. And even with the big kind of music that we have now, couldn't have existed without those developments in terms of the rock and roll and the styles that broke through in the 1950s into the 60s. But once again, turning to the technology to bend our human will to do things such as travel back in time became, I think, a very appealing film, especially with its comedic aspect. But on the flip side of that, there are films like Blade Runner, and Blade Runner remains one of my favorite of the dystopian series of films because, again, there's so much in that has become real. Blade Runner looks like downtown Tokyo at any time, day or night, and becomes this notion of identities and the intrigue of extremely busy, distracted city. There's no room to breathe because there's just things going on. And of course, the ultimate question, which kind of leads from the first couple of films we spoke about here, am I real or am I the replicant? Do I know? Now, the book itself, upon which it was based, gets into that in more detail, of course, as they always do. But the whole idea of if I'm not real, if I'm a construct, if I'm some sort of robot or computerized reality, okay, but do I still get to dream? Do I still get to feel? Do I still get to love? And is it okay? you know, so there's that notion. Well, maybe I am, but is that okay? So that again is a marvelous film, not only in terms of that sort of intellectual pursuit, but also the visuals. The visuals of that film are just stunning in terms of creating that hugely overpopulated, hugely over-manufactured cityscape. Others have done that as well. Some of Terry Gilliam's films, like Brazil, which is not so much science fiction as it's a twist on a whole 1984 theme, but there's a particular scene in the movie Brazil where the lead character is driving home down this road in his little car. And the highway is just wall to wall billboards. All you can see on the highway is just billboards to your left, billboards to the right, just a complete, unending strip of billboards. And as the camera raises like a crane shot above the road and above the billboards, you see there's this beautiful landscape, absolutely gorgeous farmland and hills and trees and birds and things like that, that the people can't see because the entire road is just blocked off with these billboards, which again is one of these marvelous scenes and representations of what we do. You know, we don't look around, we don't see the beauty of the world. The billboards now have become on our phones, but the whole notion of the visual distraction remains, and people are not seeing what's around there. So this is a favorite of mine, and I'm just wondering if you have another one in the same vein.
I can't let you talk about Blade Runner without at least me saying how much I love that movie and appreciate that movie. If you're following sort of technological developments, you perhaps know that there is a big bet out there about can we make artificial intelligences and then stick them in robots? Because that's really the only way that the future is going to work out without us going into a dark age. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but that's like the big bet, right? And if we can do that, right, then there'll probably be 10 robots for every human on the planet, because think of all the things that you don't want to do that robots would probably be fine to do. If that happens, if these robots go rogue, there will be, one assumes, humans who have to go track down those robots, which is exactly the plot of Blade Runner. We are right on the edge of the main thesis for that movie perhaps becoming true. Right? Probably within our lifetimes, just the way things are moving. A couple of things that movie did get wrong, how clean the future actually turned out to be. Blade Runner came out to 1982, and so they sort of predicted like chicken guts on the ground and just grime everywhere, even in Tokyo, right? But actually it turns out that we're actually much, much cleaner than we were even then. So they kind of got that wrong, which I think they somewhat corrected for in Blade Runner 2049. And then the massive overpopulation thing.
These are just a few, let's say, of the movies in the past that have been quite remarkable. And there's many that we have overlooked or just in the interest of time can't bring them all in. And I'm hoping that our listeners will be able to keep the conversation going on LinkedIn to talk about the films you liked in the same area. But to turn around to face the future, or the present at least, do you know of any great series on streaming media, streaming television that is kind of the same as, let's say, iRobot, for example, or Mr. Robot? I mean, both the movie with Will Smith, but also Mr. Robot. These are great binge-watching type movies of recent times. Anything else stand out that's big right now on this kind of cyber angle?
I had briefly mentioned that movie Pluribus, which, if you haven't seen it, it is similarly mind-bending, expansive. That's something that's worth watching, I think, because it seems to bring up this bigger idea of the connectedness of humanity, right? And when we started this conversation, I talked about 1995, the invention of the World Wide Web, where you could communicate with anybody around the world effectively for free. What would that look like if you took it to this logical extreme? And then what would it look like for the people who are somehow not part of that? Young people today have no idea that back in, like, say, late 80s, if you wanted to talk to somebody who was not in the United States, it cost an insane amount of money. I mean, it was a lot of money, so, to the point where almost every ad you would hear within an hour, you would definitely hear an advertisement for, hey, 25 cents a minute for international calls. And I remember as in the early 90s, as I was working on the internet, and I realized we could email. We were really, really close to being able to do audio over voice over IP, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, this is all going to be free. And I remember getting a call from a quote, quote, telemarketer who was trying to sell me on 10 cents a minute. And I said, this stuff's all going to be free. Like, your business model is completely screwed. They got the last laugh, though, because all the telcos pivoted to be the ones who control the internet going into your house. So you still have to pay them. So apparently they weren't as dumb as I thought.
Well, that's a great business case study right there, isn't it? Rather than becoming extinct because of the technology, you take it, you adapt, you become agile, and you move forward. What came to my mind as a sort of the last one that I want to share anyway, again, a really great lesson for people who've grown up with completely unfettered access to wireless interconnected technologies. There was a British TV series called Life on Mars. And the essence of this film was, what happens if you were a modern day police detective and you wake up one day in 1974? And that's what happened, was that the character had a car accident. And when he woke up, he was back in 1974. No cell phones, no reliable television. The notion that everything we take for granted now, instant delivery of things from Amazon rather than waiting 4 to 6 weeks for delivery, just going to the stores and having to pay everything in cash after having gone to the bank to take money out of a bank from a teller. This was a remarkable kind of visual lesson on what things were like in recent, like memorable history for some people still around, of what life was like in the analog era. It's a wonderful experience of going back to that specific thing.
I also want you to know, I did do my homework. I actually went and saw the most recent Tron movie. It wasn't quite as good as the first one, but there was some elements in it that bring back some of the feelings of that first one. And in the same theme of everything we talk about today, there is the sort of mixing of the digital world and the real world, which is a theme of both of our lives, I'm sure.
Well, this has been terrific. And again, I always encourage people who are listening to try out a couple of these movies. Of course, you can find them anywhere. And they are definitely worth your time. Again, just not only as artistic masterpieces, I think, but also just to see how you feel about how it relates to where we are and where we've come from. And I say this with complete genuine feeling here. What an absolute pleasure this was to just sit and talk about these things. It's so great just to revive them. So it's been wonderful, David, and I really hope we can do this again, because it's just so much more fun than real work.
Steve, anytime you want to talk about the big issues of life, I'm here for you.
Remember, if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend or a colleague or a client or all of them about the Thales Security Sessions podcast. Not just for the next one, but for our archive of highly useful Ask conversations. And if you have suggestions for movies that you think speak loudly about the world of technology and reality, join the chat on LinkedIn. Just search for Thales Cybersecurity Products. We will be back again soon with another episode and another discussion on the topics that you need to know about to successfully carry on in the business of information security. Until then, I'm Steve Prentice. Thanks for listening.
That was fun!